Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we are going to be tackling bundling and all the complexity that comes with it, and all of the wonderful world of how we make these projects just a little bit more performant as they get more complex. And to do that, I have a very experienced engineer, somebody who's been doing this for quite a while. Let me bring to the stage Zack Jackson. Zack, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to have you on the show. I feel like you and I had a really good conversation. God, it was months ago now.
It
Um,
was render ATL, so that must have been
it was, yeah,
July or I think it was
yeah.
July.
Had a great conversation about the stuff you were working on, and it just took us this long to line this up. But I am pumped that it's happening now. So I'm really excited to talk about what you've been working on. But before we do that, for anybody who's not familiar with you and your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background on who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I work let's see. I'm an infrastructure architect over at ByteDance, and I think like prior to that I've spent a lot of time just in like web infra stuff. Probably my main specialty was like bundling. And yeah, that's essentially what I've done for the majority of my career is like bundling related stuff. So working on bundlers, plugins, problems of scale. Um, I'm also probably most well known for Module Federation. So for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's essentially the ability to share chunks or parts of different bundles without like code reuse, or I mean with code reuse and so on and so forth. But yeah, lots of work in the open source space, generally toward like enterprise type issues.
Got it. And so you say you've been working on bundles for most of your career. Does that mean that you have been like cross project, and how far back does that go?
Let's see. So I started, I would say probably like 2014. So I had just gotten into like web development.
Hmm.
Um, I had I mean, this is like back in the gulp and grunt days. So, this is
Yeah,
kind of like how long ago it was.
yeah.
I think what started it all out was I was working on some like WordPress type project, and it was at like a consultancy, or like one of those agencies. So the idea was like to pump out a lot of sites,
Hmm.
and I'd gotten kind of tired of the redundancy of it. And so at the time I had built this gulp tool that essentially would take a sketch file design, and convert it into like a WordPress theme, and would generate like all the template files and all the PHP and everything like based on certain tags you would put in Sketch.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so, this is like way before any bundling stuff came out, but back then it was like gulp and grunt, and then when Webpack came along, it was like, oh, okay, wow, we finally have I think the big thing around Webpack was the whole idea that you have this omniscient view. It
Right.
understood your CSS and your JavaScript and how they actually connected to each other, and images and so on. And that was like, I would say, probably a big I don't know, I just really enjoyed that concept after having to deal with like a whole bunch of janky different parts of like a
Right.
site, to have one thing where everything goes in there and it pops it out. Um, yeah, so I mean, we're talking like 2014 up till now. And I think I really got serious into the open source space probably in 2015 or 2016. That's where things kind of accelerated a little more.
Absolutely. And so today you were working on a project, and I'm going to let you describe it because I'm pretty sure I wouldn't do it justice. So what is the project that you're maintaining today?
So there's a few, but the big one is RSPack
Hmm.
and Module Federation. Those are probably the two like biggest by, I would say, like install base. Um, and then we also have a couple other things that we work on, like MidScene, which is a AI powered end-to-end testing framework.
Okay.
We've got Links that we're about to release next month, which is going to be our answer to React Native. Um, and a couple other things that are coming out, but the big one probably is going to be RSPack. And so RSPack, so we refer to it internally as the R stack, just because
Okay.
the idea behind RSPack was we had built it to serve the business's needs. And because the company owns over 1,000 applications and has something like 20,000 front end repos, um, yeah. The challenge that we had kind of had was just building it at scale was a real problem. Like, so a lot of the builds were Webpack based, and we've got projects that are 100 gigs plus in repo size. So obviously, bundling became a major issue.
Sure.
Um, but the other kind of thing is we have a really, really customized build pipeline in terms of like in China, we have to deploy apps to WeChat, and WeChat uses what's it called? The JSON module format. So it's kind of like JSON
Oh,
applets that define the schema or whatever. So you can't just bundle ESM and ship it. Those many apps have to, your chunks are actually JSON themselves. So you have to have a really specialized build pipeline that can handle, okay, well, the US outputs like normal web, but then also these kind of weird, quirky mini apps or native apps or other things that we have to do for the rest of the business. So having one tool that could do it all, you know, is economical.
yeah.
So obviously we used Webpack as like our building layer. And then the reason, and so what RSPack essentially started out as is let's rewrite Webpack one to one in Rust. So
Hmm.
for us, the cost of compute was, so we tried two options. So one, how expensive is the problem in terms of product latency, like builds taking 40 plus minutes? Um, and then two, what about migrating to something like Vite? And so
Right.
that was, I think, what we had tried maybe 2 years ago, try to migrate to Vite. And the problem is like it just doesn't serve the needs of the company, which is one of the reasons like Webpack is so useful,
Mm-hmm.
but not everybody needs all the power that Webpack could bring. We've gotten a lot of people who hate that configuration style or writing a plugin for it, but that's because it can do everything, and most people only need it to do maybe 10% of its capability.
Right. And so just to touch on something that I think is really important. So you launched this project to rebuild Webpack one to one in Rust, and the reason, you mentioned the costs, and I think it's just helpful to sort of enumerate what those costs are, because it can be tempting to just say, oh, something is slow, rebuild it in Rust. But a lot of times you'll spend so much time doing the rebuild and the maintenance that it absolutely decimates any gains that you would get otherwise. But in the case of ByteDance, you said thousands or tens of thousands of repos and gigabytes of files that need to be bundled. And so the efficiency of going from JavaScript to Rust does in fact bear out over time. And the speed gains, like having I assume if there's 20,000 repos, there's probably 20,000 plus engineers. Having any number of those engineers sitting idle for an hour while they wait for something to build, that adds up in such a big hurry to be millions or tens of millions of dollars in waste over the course of a year. So suddenly the cost of like a few engineers to full-time maintain something like RSPack to speed up bundling, the economics of it suddenly work out as kind of a
Yeah.
no-brainer in a
Yeah.
way that they
This
really
is
don't at other scales.
this is the economies of scale issue, which is I think
Yes.
another reason why I know like there's a lot of mixed feelings about like when a I don't know, like an enterprise company or a big company owns open source. And
Hmm.
people usually were like, oh, well, we don't necessarily, I don't know, the community's funny about it. But what I've also found is like some of these problems can't really be solved unless you have a problem that you experience yourself large enough to actually solve it or the resources to solve it. Like something like tree shaking isn't a weekend project that you just create. I mean,
Right.
we've been using just an example of code optimization, Terser. Terser's been the standard since how long ago was it? I don't know, like
It's a
2016 or 15?
while, yeah.
So it's almost been 10 years, and there hasn't really been any change to Terser at all because somebody wrote it, it worked, and even though there's like drawbacks, and like right now, all bundles still leave about 40% dead code in the build. But because of
Jeez.
design decisions made 10 years ago, due to the compute complexity, they had decided, okay, well, we should just optimize it at the chunk level and not do module passes and then link that to like the final output because it'd be too slow to optimize one by one and then as a whole. So they do
Mm.
group and optimize instead of analyze, optimize, group, and optimize again. So, I mean, just to kind of give you the idea of, we've been stuck with, 40% more bloat in the code, mostly because, like, it's a hard problem and you need resources to solve it. So, anyway, getting off track, yeah, so like the challenge that we had seen really was, okay, so if we move off of Webpack, the cost of doing so was extravagant. You've got
Right.
20,000 repos, you have to move 20,000 repos, and some of these, I mean, we own a couple popular apps, so you can imagine the business risk in maybe moving, a billion user app or, whatever, over to a brand new pipeline that may or may not work, plus how long will it take to get feature parity, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So there's one, just the time and the manpower to actually rewrite the entire pipeline. Then two, well, can the thing we're going to do what we need it to do right out the box? No. Which was like another big challenge. So for an example, I know Veet's working on this now with Rolldown, but this was a major issue that I think kind of stopped us from looking into it was the unbundled mode. It makes things really fast because you don't have to like build all the dependencies up front, so the app technically starts right away, but you then send a lot of chunks back to the browser in development mode. But at ByteDance, that would end up, and I don't think Veet has like a really like proper HMR implementation. Maybe they do now, but I'm not sure if it's still just kind of like live reload. But when we used it, it was live reload based, and each page refresh took 10 minutes in development mode.
Oh,
Because
wow.
when you're pulling down, a 3 GB app, how many little
Right.
micro chunks is that going to be? And at some point, it's the network overhead that pulling, you know, several gigabytes in 10,000 slices in a browser, plus, oh, well, they have DevTools open and maybe they have their cache, unchecked, which Veet says,
Right.
you don't need to do that. Or what if they have a Chrome extension and an ad blocker? So it's not even like technically, yeah, HTTP2 can handle sending that down, but then it's the user's environment that nobody really factors
Right.
in. Which cool, 2 Chrome extensions and that ruins your speed. So trying to like
Right.
keep everybody building in the dev environment the same way, it ended up being just more on-call support than any other option as well. And also like optimization, it doesn't cut, so basically we had this spot where Webpack works, but it's too slow. And we had done a bunch of tests to see like how fast does a build need to be to actually before you enter diminishing returns, at least for us, because we have like a lot of data and a lot of apps and
Mm-hmm.
so we have a pretty good sample size on our own. So what we had found is if your CI pipeline takes over 30 minutes, that adds about, what was it? I think it's a 1,600 hours. Is that right, or is it minutes? Um, I think it adds 1,600 minutes of product latency. So basically, if the build takes 30 minutes to run,
Mm-hmm.
that branch will most likely only merge in 1,600, so like in like 16 hours time. Or
What
if
is
I've
that
got
by
the
60 is 26 hours?
yeah. So that would be generally the latency you would see get added onto anything going out the door. Even if it was just a typo fix, you would kind of get lost in,
Right.
just think about like the mechanics of doing your work. Oh, well, if the build's going to take 40 minutes, you're not going to sit and watch it. Maybe you'll do it for 10, but after that, you're going to do
Mm-hmm.
something else. Or maybe it's toward the
Right.
end of the day, and then you go and do it tomorrow. And then, oh, well, there's a
Right.
queue to have to walk the release through. So it's not just build and ship, but when that build step, like, becomes such a delay that you go and do
Right.
something else,
Well, and
essentially your product
inevitably,
velocity drops.
yeah, and you're gonna make a mistake the first time. Something's gonna get caught in CI. You have to go back and make that fix. And it's like if you've got a 2 day lag between realizing there's a problem and when you're actually able to ship that problem, like it's that's also just I remember working at when I was at IBM. We weren't quite that bad, but it was definitely like it was a solid like full day effort to get something through into production. And
And
you would
if you think about that full day as well, like how much of that is actually spent shipping value versus like running around the infrastructure?
and
Go over
it
here,
was
talk to
hundred
that
percent
person,
running
talk to
around the infra.
QA.
Yeah, send a DM, make sure that somebody's actually looking at your build, check with the DevOps person, is it stuck, or are you just waiting on it? Like,
Got to get in the merge queue, arguments about who goes into the merge queue first.
right.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. All
so,
that.
yeah.
And
None
it changes you from being
deliverable. None of that's
yeah.
value added.
And none of it, like, I think the thing that really got me about that was that it made me feel less like I was building, and it made me feel more like I was sort of like the caretaker of this like PR. I didn't feel like a developer anymore. I sort of felt like an administrative assistant that was sort of shepherding this this little bit of code across a finish line.
Exactly. And so, that's kind of and I think one of the things that ByteDance is like very well known for in general is like their ability to ship apps quickly. Like, there's a really good article I always recommend people read called How ByteDance Became the World's Most Valuable Startup. So if you just Google it, it'll pop up. It's from Harvard Business Review. And it does a pretty good job of like detailing like how the company's organized and how they're able to operate so quickly. And like, so if you look at it from that lens, it also makes a lot more sense why we would care about something like this. Because, the idea I think is, well, if you can, so there was a quote from somebody else who was at one of the FANG companies who had said that they'd worked on one of our apps and they had done this at another company before. And it took us, I think, 3 months to do it. And they said at the other company, it would have taken closer to 18 months to ship the same thing. Dang. So they're really like, how fast you get it out, the faster you can iterate, the faster you can validate theories, the faster you can find something that works. So, output speed and efficiency is really, really important.
Absolutely.
And so anyways, this is where RSPack had come along. So we knew that we had this product latency of, day to 2 days between any PR that gets opened if the build is over this much time. Now, if the build stays within the 5-minute range, the turnaround time on the merge is usually only about, I think it was like a 20-minute latency or so, if you can keep the build within that 5-minute window. Because then the dev is still kind of hot in their head. Right. They are still communicating. The thing's ready. I've seen it on stage. We can walk it through everything else. So the whole getting it out the door is just much faster because nobody like has to go and meander off somewhere else. Right. Or at least that's my theory. But just from the measurements we saw, that was essentially it. The faster the build, the shorter the minutes are that it gets to prod by an order of magnitude. And so that's where we kind of launched into building out RSPack is, one, we needed something that would handle everything that we needed it to do. 2, we needed something that was guaranteed to have no risk to the business to do it. And we needed something that would keep on-call pressure really low. So I think there's maybe like 80 people on our infrastructure team, 50 or 80 in total on our infra team. And we are responsible for all of the web infra work at the company. So, that you can imagine if you've got like tens of thousands of devs and a problem crops up, how fast that'll eat into your manpower time. So making sure that something is going to work and going to continue to work and, can more or less work autonomously is, an important thing. So we started out with just building out RSPack. Which was kind of what we just refer to now as like the base layer. So RSPack is more like our build engine. And then we have this, how we refer to it internally is the R stack, because at the company, we obviously have modern JS, which is like every web project you see, if it's a website, it's running on modern JS from us. We've got RSPress, which is all, because we need to generate a lot of docs, because we build a lot of products and a lot of libraries. So we need DocGen. So we have RSPress for handling our docs. So we author a bunch of libraries. So we also need a library packaging meta framework. And so we've got Rslib. So this thing kind of broke out. And then also most people don't want to configure Webpack. So we have something called Rsbuild, which is probably the best way to actually use our tools. And it's essentially like a Vite style configuration style.
Sort of like the right defaults baked in so that you don't have to make choices unless you hit edge cases.
Yeah, if you want to use React, it's just React plugin, and there's a little preset that you add on. And if you want to say control an environment. There's an environments object, so you can configure multiple environment builds at once. We have load bundle which is similar to Vite's, I think, like import module or whatever that they have in their build chain. So it's essentially the same kind of thing that we have. And those were all areas that were really missing in Webpack, because Webpack, yeah, it was really good at doing the work, but it was not very friendly to interact with, like day to day. I want it to do its job well, but I want to configure it without 30 minutes on a new project every day.
Sure.
So, yeah. So trying to like lower that barrier of, hey, here's a thing that will just work. And then also, how do these different tools layer on top of each other and compose together? Since like we want to build everything so that this is not, we don't want to build a giant monolithic solution because that's harder to maintain and it's also less adaptable. So what we do is we want to layer all of our infrastructure. So internally, we have this whole layered kind of infra. Everything's built off of something else, built off of something else. And we kind of do the same thing with the RStack, which the idea is we have a unified solution where everything's independent, but it's designed to work well with another product of ours. So if you want bundle analysis and documentation, those two are built to work together, but they're not built to make you use them both.
Got it. So it's very it's like modular, but modular in a way that's not fragmented like some of the ecosystem can be. Where it's like you get modules, but one module is built by somebody over here, another module is built by a different maintainer on the other corner of the ecosystem. They don't know about each other, so like you don't know how those plugins are going to interact. You kind of have to be ready to deal with that.
A good example is like, let's say you have something like, Next.js and Storybook. Welcome to hell.
Yeah.
Like
yes.
Or you use, I don't know if Storybook, I think Storybook, I don't know if it works with Vite or not. But like just imagine you have one where, oh, well, this thing uses a different build tool than what you use, but you need them both. And then, cool, well, this one might not have that convention anymore, or so on and so forth. So having something where, hey, here's the same thing, and it's all the same build engine under the hood, and it all works well together, and it's familiar, it saves a lot of time, makes it much easier to do things, and also helps us, like, expand our ecosystem in a useful way.
Yeah.
But I would say,
a question in the chat about how you manage testing. Is there, like, an RS testing?
Currently, we just use Vitest, but I think this year we're considering an RS test. I saw a tweet from one of my team members where there's like, this might be the year for RS test. So, which I'm very for, because I want to have unit testing for module federation, but for that to work, I need a transformer that understands federated imports. So having RSPack based transformer for testing means that testing libraries would understand remote components and could pull them in on demand and test your foreign modules from other users.
Gotcha.
So I'm very bullish on that one.
Cool. Very cool. Okay. So I want to make sure we've got enough time to kind of try this out and like put something together. So we've got about 60 minutes left on the clock. So why don't I take us over to our screen share here, and I'm gonna share this whole window. Let's get this out of here, and then we'll get the right window up.
So one more thing to include in there about just like, why we built it. We obviously built it for our own needs and like the problems that we had to solve, and then open sourced it because we kind of looked at it and we were like, okay, well, due to the number of apps that we support, open sourcing this doesn't actually add much more burden onto us. I think that all open source users maybe contribute maybe 20% of the workload. So when we open source, it was virtually no difference because the product, it already worked internally on so many. But I would say probably the biggest thing about what we've seen in building out RSPack has been the ROI on it. I think for every $1 that we invest, we get something like $70 back in yield on it.
And this is where I think the economies of scale become mind-boggling, right? Because when you're a small startup, you got 35 people. The idea of dedicating a full-time engineer salary, which is anywhere from $150,000 to $750,000 a year, right, in the U.S., you're like, of course we can't do that. We can't afford to put a full-time engineer on this open source project. But when you're a company that's the size of tens of thousands of employees, you almost can't afford not to. And it's
Yeah.
just interesting how that shifts over time.
Yeah, like I think so in total, I think or per year, I think it's yielding hundreds of millions in return,
Jeez.
just to give you an
That's
idea.
nuts. That is unbelievable.
Yeah, given the cost of developing it is a fraction of that. Like, and
Yeah,
also because, especially because we also have like members from all over the world, so we don't have to always pay U.S. prices for everything. So it has
sure.
also
Yeah,
made the feasibility of building all this stuff out a lot more realistic. And because of the time zone
absolutely. Yeah.
differences, we also have like 6 days a week, 18
Round the
hours a
clock
day.
coverage. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's cool. That's very, very cool. Okay, so I'm sharing your Blue Sky. Do you want me to share a different profile for you for anybody who wants to follow?
Uh, Probably my Twitter profile would be the one I'm most active on. I think I have to re-log into Blue Sky after an app update. But Twitter's the one where I'm like most active on here. So like all the updates and stuff like that will show up over here.
Got it.
Um,
And we are talking about RSPack today.
yeah, so we're
So we'll
talking
drop a link
about
to that.
RSPack. And then if you do want to try it out, what I would suggest is we go for Rsbuild. So just click on the little squares up in the top corner next to the icon.
Oh, look
There
at
we
all
go.
these.
And so that's the whole
Beautiful.
the whole collection. And so Rsbuild is like, unless you currently use Webpack and you need an off ramp, just go for
Hmm.
Rsbuild right away. Like I would say
Okay.
RSPack vanilla is only useful if you currently have a Webpack config. If you want to use our ecosystem for new builds, just use Rsbuild. All the
Got it.
defaults are nicely set. It's got plugins for it. It's much easier to extend and enhance. It's very Vite familiar, so anyone who's coming from that will know it well. So this is what I would suggest is your main use point for stuff.
Got it. Okay. Let me just update that right there then. So we're gonna learn Rsbuild today. So I'm excited because it's been a while since I've explored build tools. You know, once I made the switch from Webpack to Vite, I kind of stopped thinking about it entirely. And so I'm really interested to see how the space has evolved in the few years since I've really dug in. So what's the first thing that I should do if I want to build a new project here?
So let's go to the quick start and let's just see what we've got on the quick start. There should be like a little generate, thing on how to generate it. Yeah, creating a
Here we go.
project.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just realized I got to do a quick shout out here. We've got a live captioner here, like we do on every episode. Vanessa's here from White Coat Captioning. Thank you, Vanessa, for being here. And this episode is made possible through the support of our sponsor, Tuple. Tuple is great for pair programming if you want to just start up a remote session and have a lot of nice things for making that pair programming work well. But make sure you go and give them a shout. All right, so I have my npm create Rsbuild at latest. Let's start a project here. I'm going to close this one and let's get a new window going. All right, so I'm going to move into my GitHub folder. Oops. And we'll build it in here. Why is this so tiny? Okay, let's npm create Rsbuild at latest. And we're going to call this Let's Learn Rsbuild. What's your recommendation? You want to go?
Let's go, I would say, with the React, because I know React the best, so
I
probably
also
going
know
with the
React the best. That's probably
There
going to
we
work
go.
out well for us. Probably like ESLint and Prettier. Those are the ones I know best.
I mean, I always like to go with Biome, so get the full Rust experience end to
Yeah,
end.
let's do it. I've never done it before. Let's try it. Oh, that went fast. Okay, so let's go in here, npm install. And then let me actually open this project. Profile am I in right now? That's the problem. Okay.
There we go.
All right, now we're looking at something that looks reasonable to me. Okay, so this is our project. We are going to git init just to get this showing up over here properly. And so now we have our source. There we go. And so this looks pretty familiar from what I typically do. We've got the the app TSX for React. We've got the CSS folder. Our root render, all that good stuff. So what are the things that we need to know when we're climbing into a project running Rsbuild?
So I would say the main thing really is going to be your Rsbuild config. That's where, everything's kind of controlled. And the nice thing you can see is like it's also extremely minimalistic. So considering that this is like somewhere deep down, like a Webpack, RSPack under the hood, you can see why I prefer this configuration, because this is your full config to get up and running,
and this feels very similar. Like it gives me the same sense of relief that I get looking at like a Vite config.
Yeah, so we definitely, like, Vite changed the game on what it means to configure a build, and that's something that when we were creating RSPack, we definitely took a nod to, their, took a nod to, like, what they had done, change the landscape, and ensure that, I think this is why it got so popular, is it got rid of kind of bundling hell, and it was fast. So bringing that in was a big one. So essentially, yeah, like this is what you've got to work with. What I would say some useful things to know about it are like the define config. Maybe if we jump to the Rsbuild doc site, you can see some of just the basics on configuring it. There's some various options if we just go to config. Yeah, so you can see here we've kind of got like our top level ways to configure it. If you want to control anything with HTML, you would just put an HTML object on there. What I usually find myself working with a lot of the time is going to be source and server and dev areas. Those are like the main things. Like if I want to, if you want to use define, source define would be like define plugin. So, how you would statically put process envs, like if if it's production, that's where you could add all your custom like env variables you want to serialize into the build. Anything to do with your server, setting up ports, bases, things like that. The tools area is also quite nice. So while Rsbuild simplifies this significantly, the tools section gives you access to RSPack. So we should have a tool, tools.rspack. And so if you click on that one, this will let you break into the Webpack build config again, or the RSPack build config. So now Rsbuild abstracts most of what you want to do. Like if you want to write a loader, for example, you don't have to do like a custom loader like you would with Webpack, its own file with a weird API. You could just go like api.transform like you would do in ES Builder and Vite. So it has that like .transform or .resolve where you can like add a transform or resolve on. But if there's something deep, like sometimes I need to dig in here and, change the chunk formatting options or, something that's like lower level, you can easily just tap right back into RSPack and get that post Rsbuild configuring it. You could still hook into RSPack directly and maybe inject a Webpack plugin that you need right onto the build, or go in and modify something deeper that maybe the tool doesn't expose for, the 90 percentile use case.
Got it. Okay.
So using Rsbuild does not restrict you from accessing the underlying tool.
But I can see how this is nice too, because it means like if you want to set up an alias, you don't have to fully eject from Rsbuild. You get to just kind of keep rolling with the project, and you only have to do this little bit instead of giving up entirely on the batteries included part of Rsbuild.
Yeah, it's not like a CRA or anything like that. It'll give you lots of control over that. If you also let's go to, I think it's API, or let's go to plugin. In the menu, in the menu up here. Just in the top,
Got it.
There we are. And then if we just go to plugin system in development in the right menu at the bottom there, then there should be, I think this is, does it say anywhere, does it show us our hooks that we provide?
Lifetime
Maybe
hooks?
go to, okay, so here we go. So then go to the API reference. Yeah, okay, so you can see these are some of the hooks. So if you wanted to write your own little plugin, these are some of the hooks that you can access that allow you to kind of control or change or modify the life cycle of the build, and things like that. And there's some cool ones on there. Like the one that I use a lot is API.transform, which I think is probably, these are all the lifecycle hooks. So I'm not sure, it might be under the API section, the next menu tab over. But there's a whole bunch in here that, yeah, and then I think in the build core,
Would it be
there, that would probably be faster.
plugin core? There we go. API.
There we are, the plugin core. So if you do want to make a little custom plugin, here's an example of, oh, well, if you wanted a loader, well, that's how you do loaders here. So you don't have to use those old Webpack loader style, but you can do transform, and then resolve works the same way. So one, you could either access RSPack and always do it the Webpack style way if you wanted to, but if you don't have experience in Webpack, you're more familiar with the Vite ecosystem, then you could also, customize this thing however you want by having your own little setup on there. And anything that we don't explicitly expose up there, a lot of it might be under here, like .transform, or there's another one for resolve as well that gives us the same kind of thing, where you would be able to say like request, there you go, resolve data request. And what's cool about resolve data, what I've loved a lot about this is resolving is also based on who's asking for it. So this is a problem I always run into with like whenever I would use Esbuild or Rollup is I think resolving, it's just a one time for the life cycle of the app. So I can't say, okay, well, I want to resolve this thing, but who's importing it? So was index.js importing it, or was something else JS importing it? And based on that, I want to change the resolve rules. And so this is something I believe that this lets us do because it hooks into another plugin deeper down called normal module replacement, which is like a super powerful like module resolution layer that I've absolutely loved for all sorts of fancy things. But just to give you an idea on some of the if you ever want to go in and fiddle with something, this is kind of some of the cool areas of it. For most people, though, it's just going to be that config page that you're looking at and maybe pulling one or two off-the-shelf plugins.
And I think the thing that's interesting about this is when you get into bundlers, what I find really fascinating about them is that at the end of the day, they are it's a pipeline that we're dropping a file in and we get something else out the end, right? And we just get to decide what happens along the way. And so a lot of stuff that feels like we have no control over it is actually really configurable if you can get to that layer of what your bundling tool is doing. And the part that I found really interesting is I found all sorts of interesting use cases. Like I had an instance where I had like some link where everything had been turned into like an Amazon referral link, right? And so instead of me having to do a find and replace across everything, I was instead able to write a quick replace that would just strip all that out and then log where the page was that had the link so that I had like a hit list to then go edit those files later, but it didn't have to be done like all at once in one big content management nightmare push. And that wasn't like a bundling thing. That was a content management thing that I was able to control because I understood how to tap into the bundler process and like do these transforms and these things like that. And it really is interesting, especially if you're doing sites that have markdown, if you're doing anything that's got this custom stuff, you can make some really interesting changes and transforms into your sites. With the caveat, of course, that every plugin you build has to be maintained.
Truth. But this I would say this is what got me into bundlers in the beginning, was this whole idea of like, wait, so you're telling me the thing that I write or that the developer writes is really just a suggestion to the bundler. And when I heard that, I think maybe like my younger power hungry self got obsessed with that idea, and it's like, oh, okay, so I have the keys to the kingdom here. And I'd also gone through a lot of companies where there was a lot of like bureaucratic and political, let's talk about doing something for 6 months and actually do nothing. So I was looking for solutions to problems, and one of them was the bundler, because okay, well, I don't need to ask permission from anybody if I just write a plugin to do the refactor internally inside the build tool, because one, nobody understands what it's doing and will ask questions, and two, I can do the entire company in a single hit as long as I trust my own ability to write the plugin. But it was, that one can come back to bite you if you don't write the plugin well and you sideload, this refactor that won't get through, so you have the bundler do it and it doesn't work. It's like, oh, well, that's a tough one to answer. But luckily, that's never happened. I would not suggest that as a solution, but the nice thing with these tools is, oh, well, what if you have a really, really large code base, maybe manually doing something, or a regex it can't find and replace these things, or, what about switching between two different libraries? A bunch of weird cases where, oh, well, this would be like logistically a lot of dev hours to shift and shuffle these around. And with the bundler, there's lots of ways to say, hey, well, we're just going to restructure how it works a little bit in like either permanently or as a crutch until engineering can get around to doing it everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I can see exactly why you got so into this, because it really does just feel, I don't know, there's something, I feel like every once in a while you figure out the layer underneath the layer, and it's that feeling that we always describing as like kind of being able to see the matrix, right? And you just realize that you can actually do a lot more than you thought. You suddenly gain a level of agency that you maybe thought was, for somebody else. And I think that understanding bundlers, I keep making up new words as I'm trying to say this. Understanding bundlers is really something that just gives you that feeling like you're so capable if you can figure out how the bundler works.
Yeah. There's virtually, I don't know, like in my career, a lot of my, I don't know, I always would say, well, there's almost nothing that you can't solve for a company if you can wield their bundler well. If you have a strong enough build tool or compiler, whatever problem they're going to run into, if the engineering can't do it, you can, as long as you know how to do it, you can definitely orchestrate that at a larger scale. It gives you a lot of capability. And I think the other thing about knowing a bundler is it's just also good kind of career-wise, because I don't run across a lot of people who actually know how to use these tools or work on, like, there's working on them, which maybe that's just for people like me who really have nothing better to do with their lives. But knowing how to use the tool and leverage it really, really well, I think like how I got into bundlers in the beginning was, oh, this is neat and this was helpful and I know how to split chunks really well. And that's what eventually led me to building Module Federation, was my knowledge of how to do chunk splitting in Webpack and blah, blah, blah. But I also got several jobs in my early career just because I knew how to configure Webpack 2 very, very well. And that was it. That was my only criteria.
I got a job
could do it.
Early on because I had learned how to build. I built some Babel plugins so that I could do AST transforms on some GraphQL stuff to build this was before Schema Federation existed in GraphQL. I kind of jury-rigged a version of it when I was at IBM. And that ended up leading to me getting several opportunities that just because I figured out how to make that stuff work, people thought I was a wizard.
Yeah, and there's not that many. I don't know. I would say there's really not the pool of talent is very, very small for these type of things. AST stuff like that, if you can do all that stuff, and maybe so a ByteDance is probably not the best example because everybody's like that here, but at most places that I've gone to that maybe aren't the big tech companies, you're going to find that there's only a handful maybe of people who really understand this stuff well. And it's a very valuable skill to have because there is a much smaller pool of people who would know how to do it. And once you progress far up enough into an org or product or whatever, eventually you're going to come to the issues of the build does not work right out the box, and we need it to be tailored for the needs of the company.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, yeah. So knowing that this superpower is available to people, let's talk a little bit about, I mean, I guess what's a good way to maybe dig into this a bit and show people how it works? Because this is going to work just like Vite. We've got a React app running. I am relatively confident that if I npm run dev here, it's going to open up, there's our app, and that's not the window I meant to open it in. Let me take it over here. Come on, buddy. What are you doing? Come on. Here. Jeez. There we go. like make that as hard as possible on myself. Okay. So this is us running our app, and it's just like I would expect from any other bundler. So that in and of itself is very cool. And then this is being done under the hood with Rust, so we know as the app gets bigger, the compute overhead of doing the bundling work is not going to be the bottleneck for us, most likely. So where do you want to go next? What do you want to show off here? We do have a question, like, how does one go down the learning path of like getting into all this? That's a great question. When I was learning, I think I learned by reading source code, and it was not fun.
Yeah, that was how. What I asked, hey, how can I help with Webpack? And they were like, start with the compiler class and work your way down. And that's essentially what I did. But yeah, I would say, unfortunately, bundlers is a space where it's still very much brute force. Like how I learned how to write Webpack plugins was by reading other people's Webpack plugins and reverse engineering them. I would say that now you've got ChatGPT, so it's a lot easier to get over those first few hills of, because I would say the important part isn't really, like, how does this work? Or I don't know, how do I say it? Like, for me, I don't need to know how to write the plugin. I need to know what a correct plugin looks like and how to navigate the code base. So it's not even about, do you know all the hooks? ChatGPT knows every hook. Do you know how to navigate the API to tell it, hey, I need you to do this or that? And so, I think with the AI tools, it helps a lot, but most of the stuff is navigation. Do you like scan through the docs, understand how you can configure it from the outside? And then once you know how to configure it from the outside, it would be, okay, well, like, I don't know, I've had it when I was building Module Federation, for example. It was like, okay, so what I want is I need something that kind of works like externals plugin, but then I also need something that works like a resolver that resolves to an alias, and and there were like 3 or 4 other things. I'm like, okay, so Federation is like me cobbling together like 6 parts of certain features of different plugins or config options in the Webpack build. But I knew how to navigate the code base after a while, so I knew, so how does resolve actually work? So what if I just go and search for where does the resolve option from the user actually go into the bundler? So it's actually just another plugin called Resolver plugin. Boom. So, and then you kind of start to navigate through it like that. So a lot of it is looking at prior art, seeing how people solve the issues, and then, like, probably the easiest way to do it is to just start by writing something. Make a little plugin that does something that you want it to do, or a loader, or, things like that. If you want to try like getting deeper into it,
can I make a request? I want to just say, like, my favorite thing. So we'll say this, and can we just write a quick plugin that will change this to like pizza or something?
Yeah, that is fantastic. Okay, yeah, let's do that. Okay, so then let's go over to our config, and then you can just go plugins, and I think you can just put an object on there if you don't want to make a new file.
Okay.
And then I think it will be, let's just pull the docs open as well, because I think we can just return a setup function in here, but let's just get our docs open. So the other thing I love about
this is going to be in is it going to be transform, or is it going to be in the
It would be the transform one.
Okay, so here's transform.
Cool. Okay, so it'd be name setup. So we would just create an object like that, or stick that at the top of your file.
Okay, and so this would be
just
is there a
butt
convention?
replacer plugin, or no? There's no convention.
Butt replacer is the funniest thing that you could have said. I love it. Okay, so there's our setup, and let's see. This
and then you
one's
would pass it your
like
API.
This. Okay, and so we pass in the API in the argument here. And now we have access to API.transform, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in here, we can test, and in our case, we know it's a JSX. Can we just do, like, anywhere that you find a butt, change it?
You can, but I don't think we can I don't think we can regex the content. But what you can do is say test any valid JS or TS file, and then in the loader, because we have to train the loader on the context you want it to look at. So essentially, the reason why we have that whole test thing versus just something global is this is still JavaScript, so we're having to pipe it from Rust back to JS. So it's not even the serialization cost that's the major problem. It's actually the single-threaded nature of JavaScript. So every time that a new call comes back from Rust, it goes into the nappy queue, and it has to queue whoever's JS calls are going off. So if you have 10,000 in there, I have to wait for the bindings to, run through sequentially. Now, we could speed this up a ton. We have been thinking about, well, what if RSPack had its own JS runtime integrated into it? So then you don't need to actually send anything back to Node, but I could just evaluate JavaScript in Rust. And doing so, using like QuickJS or something. And then doing so, you could spawn 20, 30 different JS VMs in parallel. And in theory, JavaScript would be quick again. But for the cases of this, you train it down to the loader you want so that we're just, parsing less stuff. And then now you could go code.replace, I believe it is.
And we would do, I guess we can just kind of do one of these.
And then I think the format you return it in, I think it accepts, I think you can either return a string or you have to return an object with like code. And then you optionally can also return the source map updates and stuff like that. But we can just check what the doc example.
So the doc example is returning a string.
Then we can just return
so we can
just
string. Return the string.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so theoretically, what happens now is, does it rebuild as soon as I do that? Yes, restart because it changed. So now when I go back to this tab, what we should see is that it's replaced. And there it is, right? So this is the kind of stuff that we can get into. And this is obviously a pretty contrived example, but like this is what showed up on the screen. And this is the code that we wrote, right? So you have a huge amount of control over what happens in this sort of thing. So you can imagine, like, I think the thing that really stands out to me is when you're doing a gnarly rebrand project and you know that there are brand colors hard-coded all over the code bases across every project in your org, you can start doing things where like, hey, if there are like 90 shades of teal and your company color is teal, you can find all those different shades and like transform them to be the right company color. And again, just like flag it so that you can go fix it for real. Or, use that as a way to fail the build if like they're using the wrong brand colors after a certain deadline or things like that, where you suddenly have a lot of agency as a design systems manager or as like an ops engineer. If somebody's doing something that is not allowed, you can start by fixing it for them and then start by then end by making it an actual like build failing violation. Just really, really powerful stuff that you can do.
So another cool thing, or the thing that I've loved the most. So I'm in the process of migrating, or I'm taking the Remix/React Router 7 project, and I've ported its Vite plugin to Rsbuild. And so what I have admired most in that whole, like in doing all of that, because right before I did it for React Router 7 and Rsbuild, internally I had just ported them from a Webpack version, from the Bring Your Own Build Remix Webpack Frankenstein that they had out, and I migrated that one to RSPack. And it was a labor of love for a little bit there. And so then once I had got done with that, I'm like, okay, cool. Well, Stockholm Syndrome, let's do it again, but with Rsbuild this time and not direct. So the main challenge with any server build is you have to coordinate the client and the server resources very specifically. Most of the time, the server depends on information from the browser build. So now the server has to be aware of a browser build, and you have to coordinate, well, which one goes first. And doing those type of things in Webpack is very clunky. like to do, to configure them both, and then, oh, well, this build still needs to keep going, but I need to add some piece of string from the client one, like its references. I have to inject that into the server, but how do I get it? Or what if I don't know it until after, blah, blah, blah. It just becomes like a giant nightmare. Usually what you end up doing is just writing JSON files and having the other one try to read the JSON files, but it's also like, there's a very clear boundary there, and they don't really work well together. But go to our RSPress doc site, and another thing I wanted to show here was maybe something we can try I don't know if we have enough time, but stay on Rsbuild. I'm getting confused here. So many names. And just search for server-side rendering, because this is like, I've been playing with this quite a bit now, and this is something that I've really appreciated, is the simplicity. Try SSR, see if it rings.
Was it multi-environment builds?
I think it's the one below. There,
right there, yeah.
So this is so if you scroll down in here, you can get a bit of an idea on like, oh, well, here's how you could create a SSR type project with Rsbuild. I don't know if you've ever hand rolled one before, but they're pretty horrible to. Okay, perfect.
They really are. Yeah, I had a brief moment of hubris where I thought I was going to build my own framework, and I walked away from that fast.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart in getting them all figured. But so this is essentially like how you could set up a build if you had, say, multi-environment builds. And so this is more or less what the Remix or the React Router 7 Rsbuild plugin looks like under the hood. Is I use like the API modify environment config, and then I can choose, okay, am I modifying web or node or whichever ones that maybe are defined upstream, or I can define them ahead of time and then chain onto them. But essentially, the ability to be able to set up both your environments however you want them to, and then I don't know if we can see it it might be in this doc here, but just search and see if there's something called load bundle. Yeah, there we are.
Load and execute bundles on the server side. Oh, okay.
So this thing is amazing. So this is something that I've always wanted in various like tools, because so Vite has something like execute module, but yeah. So essentially, I wanted something very much like this, which allows me to load a bundle as part of the building steps, or like during the build pipeline of Rsbuild. Maybe I want to like essentially transform or compile something. Like maybe my infrastructure to start the servers is its own thing as well. So part of initializing this thing is to load the orchestration layer, or build and load the orchestration layer, and then that actually kickstarts the app running itself. But so load bundle is really neat, because like if you want to build, I think this is like an integrated dev server I've been working on. Like I was working on a Cloudflare dev proxy middleware. And so it was so nice because I could just go register middlewares inside of the plugin, and then in there I could say, okay, and in the middleware server.loadBundle main, and I could access the server build after it's been done, and I can kind of, pass that through as a piece of middleware. So now the whole dev server for Cloudflare and Wrangler was self-contained in its own thing, because during starting the middleware, it could access the server, which would give me request response, but would also give me access to the bundler's primitives as well. So in the middleware, I could actually start a build on the spot. Or I could just go, hey, await load bundle.default, request response next, return. And then there you go.
So my butt replacer is barely scratching the surface of what's possible here. which is fair.
So we can so maybe let me see. Oh, we have a chat here. Perfect. I can send you the pull request that I've got for the remix for the React Router one, because it's kind of cool to look around in. But you can see how my server looks as well, because it's like a really good example. I've sent it to everybody who wants to like see, okay, how do I do stuff? Because it's like a really solid example that shows a whole bunch of random things, and it's SSR, so it's just like more relevant. A lot of the examples we have in here are very, very simple examples, which is all fine. But, I've got like a lot of big companies who are like, okay, hey, well, how will I do like, 3 levels of hell? And And there's not exactly that on GitHub, and I'm like, well, I got one for you, and I send him this guy, and basically that just inside of there, it just shows you, oh, well, here's how you could use like a custom server.js file to kickstart the to kickstart the app. So you server.js, and then you could your app would just be node server.js, and then in there, hey, if it's dev mode, kind of like how Next.js works, where they have that whole, if you use a custom Next server, and then you have to go next build and next start, a kind of similar thing in here with the server MJS configurations and stuff. So then this is what the end user ends up having, which is again very straightforward. Basic build configuration. Yeah.
Oh, so this is the plugin that you're building, is the plugin React Router.
Yeah.
Okay, and is that in here somewhere?
Yeah,
Plugin
yeah,
React
that should
Router.
be.
Here we go. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So it's the example plus the actual. Oh wait, that says the. Okay, yeah, no, it's open. And I think I just pushed it yesterday, if I'm right. Should
So
all
here's
be
all the
okay.
source and everything here for the React Router plugin.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I see this is not getting updated. Hold on, I think I had to fork the branch because I changed our two-factor auth, so I think the updated stuff's on my repo. I wondered why I wasn't seeing my CI stuff because I just pushed it last night. Okay, give me 1 second, I'll send you the right one. I need to go and merge that PR, or I need to
Okay.
push back to the Rsbuild branch. Okay, let me just find it in here. React router. Okay, I think that this is the 6 commits ahead. Okay, yeah. So here we are. Let me just yeah, okay. Here we go. Sorry about that. I forgot. Okay, so here we go. So this is the branch that it's on my end. I want to see if I can sync those, but I probably won't do that on the call right now.
What did I just do? This one, this one, this one. Okay, so here we go, and we're gonna go into packages. We're gonna go into, actually, can I just do the thing? I don't think I have that permission anymore. Oh, I do. Hell yeah. Okay. I still have this thing. So this is the, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we can just open this up like we would any other project. So here's the React router. We've got the source, and so we've got our plugin utils here. What do you want to look at?
So I would say probably the interesting thing. So if we go to the React router sample in the examples, let's start with that one.
Okay.
Yeah, React router sample, and then so let's start with server.js in here. So this kind of gives you an idea of, okay, if I wanted to make like a custom executor, so, inside of Rsbuild, we have like Rsbuild, dev and serve, which is just like the built-in server that'll serve it out. But if you wanted to say, add this to say something bigger, like a custom express server or whatever, then, this is essentially like what some of our other APIs look like to implement. So essentially, all I'm really doing here is I also like how kind of simple it is, but, cool, create an Express server, create an Rsbuild instance, and then, cool, my middleware is load bundle. And then there you go. And then that's my whole dev server. And so that's an example of how load bundle would be used. App use, load bundle, there it is, and boom.
Wow. Okay, this is slick. Okay. I'm honestly kind of blown away by this. All right, so and to anybody who doesn't understand, don't worry. This stuff is complicated, this is just the sort of thing that I used to fight with all the time at IBM. So I'm like especially impressed by how simple this is.
Can you increase your font
cool.
size a little bit? It's hard to see on this thing, and maybe we can try to explain a little bit. So essentially, inside of Rsbuild, what we've got is you have one, load config. That finds our default config files. This is kind of what the CLI would do. Then you've got create an instance of it. So now you can create multiple build instances. There's a couple other little cool JS APIs to kind of look at. But all we're doing is saying, let's create an instance of Rsbuild. pass it the config, and then we're going to initialize some kind of a dev server and start off with like the default one, or create a server for it to respond on. So now it's using the, it's essentially just giving us a primitive to work with. Then really what we're doing is we add all the default middleware that we might stick on it from Rsbuild. And then really it comes down to now you add your app, which is, in this case, we're saying dev server environments node because this is a server-side rendered app. So this is the other really nice thing is all the environments that we'll configure, I can access during the startup of my actual, app itself. So now I can say, hey, give me the node build, and I'm going to load the app entry point from node, which is like the main app. And then,
so just to make sure that
so
people
app is going to
understand,
be I think it's in the server directory. Yeah, it's
TS.
that app TS. So yeah,
this is what we're actually doing here is we're loading this bundle, which is being exported as app, right? So this is the request handler, and this is how we're able to kind of do things, right? So this is the React router saying this is how you like handle a route in Express format. So then when we come down here into the server JS, we're saying, okay, here's Express, and then we've exported in app a property or a method called app, which is right here, that then handles Express style requests. So you can see that like it looks like there's a lot going on, but really what we've done is we've basically, this call here means that the entirety of the Node app has become portable inside of Rsbuild. So when we load this bundle, it's just like firing up that app anywhere, which is magical. That is so damn cool.
Yeah, so this is and so yeah, when you run load bundle here, you're essentially loading this is the server entry point. So, you could then take app, and then you could take this code already is, you could just replace that load bundle with required dist, JS app, and then there's production for you or whatever.
Right.
So it's nice and kind of transparent, but I love the fact that you don't have to like vanilla require anything or go and find it, or you don't have to like, another instance is like, you'll have something that like transforms it from JS into TS, or like from TS into JS on the fly, so you can like evaluate the pure module. But I really do love the fact that this is actually loading the bundle that comes out of the build, which means you have all the power of the build behind it the whole way.
And I think the thing that's really important here is like I've gotten myself into absolute hell in the past because I wanted to use something in an environment that it wasn't built for. And so my bundler was taking the thing and putting it into whatever format, but then I'm in, the server folder of a Next project or something, and I'm trying to require a file, but during their bundling process, they move files. So my import is broken now because it's actually moved it somewhere else. And so I'm doing something that doesn't work locally because I'm importing from a path that only exists when it's deployed. And the complexity there is just, you have to learn too many internals of too many systems, and they're all super coupled to where you deploy specifically. Whereas this is coupled to the bundler. If you know you're exporting an app bundle, then you know you can use it, and it's not related to whether you're deploying on AWS or Netlify or Cloudflare or whatever. You just have the app and you can use it, and you don't have to figure out pathing. You don't have to figure out how they're breaking up the files for distribution. You just get to use it. And that, I think that alone is worth the price of admission. Like that is a huge feature for complicated apps that are crossing the client server boundary.
Yeah, this is like when I wrote this thing out. Well, one, I struggled once or twice because, to be honest, this was the first time I started to use Rsbuild, just because like all the projects that I work on, I'm either working like way down the stack in like the supply chain of the bundler, or I'm working in Federation, or I'm working on a ByteDance project that's like a gargantuan Webpack to RSPack one. So I haven't done as much like deep diving with Rsbuild until the React Router one, because the first time I did it, I was like, oh, I'll just do it with Webpack, RSPack, and boom, I did it. And it took like 3 weeks to do it, and it was a nightmare. And then I was like, oh, well, let me do it with Rsbuild. And the slowest part was me having to ask the team, hey, how would I like do this type of weird, obscure thing just because I'd never used the API before. So this is the first thing I've written for Rsbuild. But because I know Webpack, I generally know it all. It's just the APIs are new to me. But
Right.
I was super impressed with just considering it took weeks to put together the old one. And then on this thing, it was mostly just like my own ignorance, or I needed to go and speak to Jacob from the remix team about like some random convention I don't understand. This was, this took a significantly less amount of time. It was probably a couple days to get it up and running.
Wild. Absolutely
Which,
wild.
yeah, so, but I really love the whole load bundle thing that like did it for me, because there's so many cases where like I want to, in order to like think of the what is it, remix even has a good example of this, the roots ts file. So how that works is they use something under the hood, which I'm using as well, just to, like save time, but it called GD, which is essentially like a lightweight way to execute TypeScript code. So what they do
Okay.
is the roots TS file is never actually used in the bundle. It's evaluated and it returns an object, and that object are the entry points. So then it builds a new file that
So it's
imports
building a
all your page
config.
roots. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it
yeah.
builds a virtual file called like router.js, and that contains all the imports to your app. And so, but now
Got
think
it.
about the mechanics of this, which is always kind of tricky. It's like, oh, well, if I have
Right.
that one thing and it's not in vanilla JS, so how do I evaluate and execute it? And then use that execution inside my bundle to inform how I create the build in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, so I could have ended up going with load bundle to do it, but I didn't know how to access it at the point that I needed to access it at. But it was a really good example of like, it was a similar kind of paradigm of, oh, well, imagine you have a similar situation where you have this like TS pre-flight thing and you want to bake that into like this build CLI for your job or something. And
Right.
part of it is to do a bunch of complicated things where you have maybe you're importing a bunch of dependencies. Maybe this is going to run in Dino, maybe it's going to run in Node or whatever. It's really nice to have something where you could say, oh, well, just take this thing, compile it reliably, really quickly, and kind of like almost like shipping a binary, like bundle the app into a universal format that will work anywhere, execute
Right.
on that, and then actually start doing the app, or like actually start building the app part, like self-package your infra and then run it, which I really love the paradigm of it, because I think prior this was too slow to do these type of things, like, oh, in JS to just quickly go and try and like bundle up your infra code. But in here, because it's in Rust, it's, like 3 milliseconds, and then you can do whatever weird stuff you want, crawl across the app, find all of these things, and then that could just be the pre-flight check to actually configuring the underlying tool to run,
So
which is
cool.
I really, really liked, because this is a big pain point, to like have the build be informed by the app itself. Like,
Yeah, yeah. So I've got a couple folks asking questions in the chat here. So let me pull these up. How does Rsbuild compare with Rolldown in the Vite ecosystem? And somebody gave a +1 to that, talking about migrating from Webpack to Rsbuild at work, but folks want to wait for Rolldown. So I guess, are, are they a one-to-one tool, or like what are the trade-offs?
So I guess to give you the kind of breakdown of the layers, so we would have Rsbuild versus Vite, and then we would have RSPack versus Rolldown. That would be kind of the hierarchy. So what's the difference between RSPack and Rolldown? OXC is also its own thing. So OXC,
Oh, I
so
got you.
Boshin used to work at ByteDance. I think that's where we worked with him a little prior, and that's where we kind of started on OXC, which was really, really cool. Like, the benchmarks he was doing here, when he worked here, were really impressive to see what he was working on. So OXC has a lot of speed on it, which is awesome. I think the problem with it is it needs more time to mature just because it's new. So what we use under the hood for RSPack is we use SWC, because mostly we have a really big pipeline for it. We know that it works, and I think for us, everything is like the biggest problem for ByteDance is mitigating risk. So if it's a little slower, but it's guaranteed to keep the $300 billion machine running, nobody gives two shits about. Sorry, but nobody cares about an extra second. And when we're talking about these speeds, we're getting down to the minuscules here. But in general, OXC looks really awesome. I'm pretty bullish on it, but I'm also very bullish on SWC. And I could think that a lot, whatever, SWC is a bit slower, but it could definitely be quicker if KDY was given more time to work on it. So I think, anyway, so Transformers aside, the main differences that I could see between them, I think that probably the big one is going to be, so they'll most probably both do the job that you want them to do. I think the challenge is going to be, well, one, API shapes are going to be different. I think a lot of it's going to really depend on what hooks do they expose to use. Because this has kind of been the pitfall of every Rust project so far, in my opinion, is, it's super quick and has a terrible API because we had to keep it small to keep it fast.
Sure.
And I don't know, most native, like look at Rsbuild, case in point. Like the API, it's got 4 hooks and you can do some with that, but then you have a lot of like super creative workarounds of like using Rsbuild like 3 times in a row so that it can output something else to feed back into it because it doesn't have like a virtual module API or, because it's just too limited.
And I think that actually brings up a good point about like the trade-offs, right? Because Rsbuild itself is ripping fast, but it's very rare to use Rsbuild. You usually use Vite, which is kind of a superset of Rsbuild. And so we needed the configurability, we needed the plugin layers, we needed all the extra capabilities that we could get by adding something like Vite on top of it. And so I think that has very much been something that keeps me away from a lot of the Rust ports, is that when I look at them, I'm like, okay, but how do I do this thing that I did over here? And I'm in the fortunate position where none of my projects are in the hours to build. They're mostly in the like 3 minutes to build, and I can live with that. Like, getting it from 3 minutes to 2 doesn't materially change my life, And so, like, if it was a 1-to-1 change, I would probably consider it. But because it's usually not, it's usually like, okay, this is way faster, but here are all the workarounds to get back to that functionality that you were able to do with the plugin surface or the API surface of this other thing that you're using now. It doesn't feel worth the trade-off.
And so this is the other thing that I also think where speed ultimately, because so I would say maybe the biggest thing, because I don't, so with Rolldown, I know the team behind it because half of the team was the RSPack team, so I know the people behind it, and I think that they're very capable. So I think that the tool will probably do quite well, but ultimately I think what it's probably going to come down to, I think overall what we're getting into is its ecosystem. Right. Assume the tools are probably going to do whatever that you want them to do that you're used to from the ecosystem. So whatever Vite does today, it'll probably keep doing faster. Whatever Webpack did before, it'll keep doing, but faster. And we have grown out the ecosystem so that it does more. But you're essentially in 2 different ecosystem styles. So like which side do you like to go with, and style of configuration do you want? And I think that's mostly what we're going to get. Now, maybe if we look down, again, we need to see Rolldown show up. So I'm mostly just speculating here on what we've looked at from digging around in the code and just from our own experiences on this. But I would say what will be interesting to see is like how will it handle stuff like, like they'll need chunking. So this was another thing that we had seen. So like I know that they have corrected from going with the unbundled approach, and now they're going toward an app mode, which essentially means they're introducing something like Webpack's chunk system, proprietary chunking layer, and no vanilla outputs like they had done before. So I would say like what I'm interested to see is how are they going to handle like optimization, because that usually is where the pitfall is in these
And
build tools is the chunking, is like getting your chunks to actually be either fine grained or getting your chunks right so that I don't have too many little chunks and I don't have too big ones, like max size on the chunk. So one,
right.
chunking, and then two, actually code, data code elimination, optimization, things like that. I'll be
And even
very
at just like a
interested.
higher level, I think maybe the bigger question is because I think for a lot of us, we aren't dealing at that level. You know,
So
we're
just when
building
you're like
stuff that's
looking at it, yeah,
yeah, and so
like
it almost
okay.
sounds like maybe the first consideration is what are you porting over? Like if you're sitting on a big old Webpack project, you probably don't have the time to fully port it over to Vite, like the full rebuild cost. You know, again, you got to work out the economics for your team and how much time, how many people, what is the risk if it doesn't work? Like how, you know, can you guarantee one-to-one parity of what you're doing today? Um, and if you can't answer yes to all those questions, then it does kind of sound like the right choice, unless you've got the buy-in for a full greenfield start over and write it the way you always wanted to, is just port the Webpack project over into RSPack because you don't have to rebuild everything. You get the one-to-one feature parity. You just get a speed boost because you're using a more optimized bundle system.
Yeah, so that would probably be, and then I think also just preference. Like, what have you
Sure.
historically liked? I know some users have had challenges with certain aspects of Vite because they're very ESM focused and then everything's
Mm,
kind of converted. So I don't know how well that's, I think they're going to be solving the support for that. But, if there's certain things that I think it really just comes down to preference. If speed was the big deal breaker, assume that speed isn't going to matter anymore. I think this is also a big thing where, everybody, luckily now I think we're kind of getting off the whole who's faster than who, like, you know, hype cycle to compete on, because at the end of the day,
sure.
it's really, we've entered law of diminishing returns. Like,
Yeah.
if RSPack
It's
takes
all
five
very
seconds,
fast.
yeah, if RSPack takes 5 seconds and Rolldown takes 2 seconds, I don't care because before they took 7 minutes. So at
Right.
this point, and then the argument is, oh well, at a magnitude of scale, that 5 to 2 second difference is going to be insane. And I'm like, cool, but I am the magnitude of scale. Like
I
I've
think
got a
that's
100 GB projects I'm building here, and I'm seeing this minute delta. Trust me, nobody else in the world is going to have projects bigger than ByteDance, and we are more than happy with the output speed that it gives us.
and I think that's sort of the major thing, right? Is recognizing that there's a point where you're just going for the high score and it doesn't functionally matter. Like there is a giant practical difference between an hour-long build and a 10-minute build. There is a pretty significant difference between a 10 and a 2-minute build. There is functionally no difference between a 2 and a 1-minute build in
And this
terms
was
of
that
like the
thing we,
impact on
yeah.
productivity.
This is what we had seen in that whole little chart that we had. If you can keep the build under 5 minutes, that's the golden zone where there is only a 20-minute product latency, or yeah, I think 20-minute product latency delay added. Versus when it gets to 10 minutes, it jumps to like 4 hours, and when it gets to so on, it jumps to 24 hours. So we already knew that, okay, well, we could, like, it's not going to get much quicker because the build isn't the problem anymore.
Right.
Assuming dev is quick, which dev usually is, and maybe it takes like 4 or 5 seconds to start, boom. But if your dev server is fast always, then that's probably the biggest hindrance there. And then after that, there's no way you're getting your CI pipeline out faster than 2 minutes. Like, I'm sorry, but you're not, So it's really that diminishing returns. Once we've reached the
Yeah.
point where it's acceptably quick, yes, you can make it much faster. But the other thing always is, well, the amount of compute you're dedicating to speed. I don't know. For me, when I always think about a bundler, is I don't buy a Ferrari to plow the field.
Right.
Like, I want a workhorse. So, and a
Yeah.
workhorse might not be as fast as a racehorse, but it can pull more weight. And so, generally,
Hmm.
that's always the thing where I'm like, okay, well, if you can make it, if we could make it 20% quicker, I would rather you make it 20% more powerful and keep it the same speed as today.
Yes, yes, exactly, 100%. Okay, so unfortunately, I could talk about this all day. Like this is so much fun for me, but we are out of time. So I've thrown up a link to Rsbuild. Let me throw up another link to you on Twitter here. Is there anything else you want to link to before we wrap it up?
Um, so okay, maybe one more project is Okay, well, two more. So if you do micro front ends, I would check out zephyrcloud.io.
Zephyrcloud.io. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
just
not right.
Google it. It'll pop up. I think it's Zephyr hyphen, but yeah, just Google it and it'll come up.
There it is.
Yes. So this thing is a lot of work has been put into this, but it works with the whole Federation ecosystem. Also works with Vite. I think all the big bundler people they've been working with on micro front end cloud agnostic solutions. Think of it as like Kubernetes for front end.
Oh, cool.
So
Okay.
so you can visualize, see where things are. If you want to update button in stage for that user, you can hit a button and just that user will see an updated header in this environment for them.
Nice.
And yeah, so it's a really, really neat one. Then I think another cool project, definitely Midscene. Look up Midscene JS. I think we have a AI. Yeah, there we are. So this is our newest project that we had just came out with, and this thing is awesome. So I've just personally been interested in it. Like I've done a lot of I've built out a trading algorithm, but my brokerage doesn't have an API, so Midscene is actually what's trading for me.
Oh
And
my.
so
You
I've got
are
a
trusting at a level that I am not.
well, okay, in fairness, there's an actual like Python algorithm that calculates the weights on the trades, but then it tells Midscene, hey, go to my portfolio, click on this, and I need you to go and buy it, and then tell me
I
if the
gotcha.
order went through. But so yeah, it's not fully doing it, but it's the thing that like does the instruction layer, and it works really, really well.
Sure.
So
That's very cool.
definitely. I'm
Awesome.
planning for my whole, and then maybe one last one if we'll throw it in there
Okay.
is modulefederation.io. If you do anything in micro front ends or distributed code, anything like that, then Federation is also our other popular, this is the thing that I had created back in the day.
Very, very
And
cool.
this is still what I primarily maintain alongside RSPack and all
Awesome.
the other stuff. Awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, let me do one more shout out to our captioner. We've had Vanessa here from White Coat Captioning all day. That is made possible through the support of our sponsor, Tuple. Zach, this has been incredible. I have had so much fun talking about this. This is such a cool space you're in. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Y'all make sure you mark your calendars. We got some fun stuff coming up. Head over to the schedule and check it out. In fact, I'll just throw a link to the schedule up right now. And with that, we're going to call this one all done. Thank you all so much for hanging out, and we will see you next time.